I didn't realise that the story of Relic guitars is actually fairly rich. Even if you just look at Keith from fivewattworld's video on the Fender Custom Shop, there's a little chunk in there, you know, sort of 3/4 of the way through, talking about Cunetto and JW Black and their involvement in essentially what is now coming up to 30 years ago. They put together 2 aged guitars for the NAMM show in 1995. I would have been 6 then, I think, and I thought it was really interesting. I was starting to make this video kind of just thinking, like, a Relic guitar is a little bit silly. I don't know how you feel about them. Have you ever bought a Relic guitar? Would you ever, or is it kind of like, what is the point in that to you? As you will know, Truefire sponsored this channel, but I wanted to just shout out that at the moment they're doing their best deal that they ever do, and a bit better. The All Access membership available for $79. All Access membership lasts a year. Basically, you can dip in and out of all of their courses on there, amazing players like Robin Ford, Andy Timmons, Tim Miller, etc, etc. Check out the link in the description if you're interested. So I would have thought that people asking for, you know, guitars to look older, you know, to be intentionally sort of mistreated in a way to look old, would have been something, you know, that people that maybe couldn't afford a vintage instrument would want. It turns out that the first people asking for this were Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Dave Gilmour, Sting, right? So, like, actual players that could afford vintage instruments. So that was really interesting to me. Basically, the story goes something like that the Fender Custom Shop was opened and they were making kind of one-off guitars for artists and all this sort of stuff. It was like an actual, just a custom shop then, right? But they would make these guitars for players and they'd ask for them to be aged. Presumably because, I don't know, the way that these things come across on camera or on stage, there's something more authentic or something, you know, some bit of trickery going on there that people identify with. It does seem a little bit weird when you actually kind of think about it, in my mind. If you think about it a little bit below the surface, that it's all a bit strange, right? But, you know, I think we are mostly comfortable with the idea that actually quite a lot of guitar buying and playing is about the visuals of the thing, right? I'm certainly comfortable with that for myself. You know, like, if a guitar is ugly to me, I'm unlikely to play it, just being real with you. The interesting thing for me about this was as well that I looked up kind of like the Fender history of finishing guitars, and somewhere around 68, 70, they stopped using Nitro, apparently. Now, by 1982, with the Dan Smith American Vintage guitars, I think they had started to use some Nitro again. I think there might have been a poly sealant there, and then by like 2015 they were like all Nitro guitars again. But there was a big chunk of time where they were kind of polyester guitars, and I think there's also a big chunk of time where people were just refinishing original instruments anyway. Like, it's not that easy to find totally original 60s and 50s Strats with their full Nitro coat on them, right? It's definitely pretty common to see refinished guitars. Kind of funny to think about that at some stage people were thinking, you know, that it would look better to have their guitar refinished rather than have what was this sort of, you know, Nitro stuff which was designed for cars that the dew point paint, right, and that would kind of flake off quite easily, not that resistant to weather and these sorts of things, would react with the air and would react with things like smoke, would react with guitar stands. It's funny that that's kind of come back in vogue for a lot of us. Anyway, I use K Line guitars mostly, and this one is a Relic, like quite noticeable. I guess this might be in the heavy Relic realm. This one was not, but because they used this kind of Nitro, which I guess is not going to be exactly the same as sort of 50s Nitro, hopefully less carcinogens in it, this has picked up age-related wear over time, and that's kind of the thing that I guess a lot of people are looking for from Nitro. And the thing with a Relic guitar is that you kind of start with your guitar somewhere already along that journey. This Tele, so this one actually has quite an interesting story. So when Chris and I agreed that we kind of put an ice blue Tele together, this crack here actually appeared. This is kind of the thing with Nitro, like it's a little bit volatile. And once that crack had appeared, Chris sent me an email, and it was like, do you want me to just Relic the thing, or what do you want me to do? Leave it as is? And I was kind of like, yeah, let's go for it. Prior to that crack appearing, this would have been, you know, what Fender would have called like a new old stock. I actually love the checking on this. So this didn't have like dents put in it though. So you can check a finish, which is, I think, often done by just chucking it in a freezer, and then as the body expands or contracts, you know, the paint, all that goes at a different pace, and then sudden changes in temperature cause this kind of checking, which can happen in a few different directions and stuff. But I actually really love the way that looks. There's something about it that just looks awesome. For me, a couple of things that I like about it. First of all, when you see it, it kind of just looks, as I say, I think it kind of can trick you, right? It's like, oh, that's got a story, that guitar, even though it might have just come out of a, you know, custom shop builder somewhere in Missouri or whatever. It kind of looks like this has had a life before it got to you. And then the other thing is that you're probably less concerned about it picking up some wear, which is another kind of positive thing about it, where it's like, oh, I could take it out, I could play it on a gig. If it does pick up like an extra dent or two, it's not the end of the world. Whereas on a more brand new guitar, sometimes like the first couple of dents can be really like, ugh. They kind of just don't look the same, particularly on a polyester guitar. Like I had Ibanez RGs in the past, and like they pick up a dent, it's just like, oh, it just, the whole thing flakes off. It's like, well, that's a shame. Whereas Nitro tends to, I find, sort of wear in a more natural looking way. I don't know if there's any real sound properties to it, and if there were, presumably we'd be more likely to go down the route of getting not even Nitro, like you go for something like Andy Wood's Sir, or, you know, I built my own Twatcaster which has like not Nitro or anything like that on it. You just kind of do like a wax type finish or like a natural oil type finish. But let me know your thoughts on Relic guitars in the comments if you've got any. I think for me, there's like a sweet spot where it's like this guitar will age quickly. So just a Nitro finish guitar in general, if you live in a house where the heat fluctuates quite a bit. So I've got K lines that came without checking. It just happens over time just because of the nature of some of this Nitro, if it doesn't have loads of plastic in it, which hopefully this doesn't. And then you get, you know, some of this kind of nice natural stuff happening. I think it's quite a cool thing. And as I said, I didn't realise that it was an artist request from, you know, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, David Gilmour, like these guys that were playing new guitars, but like, can we make them look old? And presumably, even at that stage, they could have afforded vintage instruments, but they wanted some of the playability of the modern guitars, but can we make them look old, please? And the other thing that you don't get with a Relic guitar generally is like divots and dents across the neck and stuff like that, which is one thing that I think, presumably on a bunch of vintage style guitars, the neck is going to have taken a bit of a battering over time, and so that could be a negative. Plus as well, the frets and the fingerboard wouldn't necessarily feel the same. That is one area where Fender Custom Shops, versus when I've played an actual vintage SG, the fretboard divots, you know, where it's just gone a little bit through the lacquer, don't actually like feel quite the same as on a real actual old guitar like that SG that I played at Francisco's. There's like a roundedness to the divots. It's kind of hard to explain, but anyway, I think you can tell the difference between a Relic most of the time and a real old guitar, unless it's something like that Nitrocaster that Jake had. But that was something that Fender were initially worried about, it being like seen as, or being taken as, and they saw them as like a forgery. Over time, you know, 30 years now into this relicking experience, I think a lot of us have got used to the idea that this is just part of making guitars in this age. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and did you know any of that? Do you have any additional information to chuck into the comments for folks, and what's your opinion on Relic guitars? I'd love to know your thoughts. Cheers for stopping by. It's nearly 2025, isn't it? So I hope you have a happy new year if you're watching this anytime near then, and I'll catch you in another video soon. I'm using Helix Native for this and the Eric Lead preset. If you'd like any of those tones, jump into the Gumroad folder and check that out. Cheers.